Okay, this video is aimed at Year 11, and it's aimed at Year 11 because it's the first of two videos that I'm going to do that look at famous events that happened to do with the civil rights movement, because obviously one of the questions that you guys had, Year 11, on your mock was a question about civil rights events in the 1950s, and quite a few of you got a bit confused and ended up talking about things that happened in the 60s. So obviously we don't want that to happen again, particularly in the real exam. So what I thought would be useful is a couple of videos where I talk about the different events, very briefly, the different events that happened in, when they happened, in which decade, and I'll do them in chronological order as well. So obviously you do have a timeline in your books, but if you want to make your own timeline, or if you need a bit of a reminder of when certain things happened, then hopefully these videos will help you. As I say, I'm not going to go into masses of detail because the idea isn't to teach you about the things that happened, because you know about them already, what you should do. It's just to remind you about when they happened, like the order that they happened in and when they happened. Obviously I'll briefly mention what happened in each event, but not in masses of detail. So, civil rights events in the 1950s, that's the first video. Civil rights events in the 1950s. So this talks about, or this will talk about, the era that you guys needed to talk about in your exam. There were some really good answers in that mock exam for this question, but obviously a few of the less good answers were the ones that talked about things that happened in the 1960s. Now the first significant civil rights event that we've looked at that you need to know about was Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka in 1954. You could just shorten it to Brown versus Topeka, but that's its full name. Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. That happens in 1954. Okay, 1954, first significant event that you need to know about. Now, in terms of the context of the event, it's in 1951 that Linda Brown's parents originally apply for her to go to the all-white school, and they get rejected. Remember that she's already going to an all-black school, or a segregated school, that's further away from her house than the white school is. She also has to cross a dangerous railroad track to get there. So her parents apply for her to go to, the school's called Summer Elementary School, and they apply for her to go there, but because it's an all-white school, it's rejected. Now, with the help of the NAACP, this should all be ringing bells to you, with the help of the NAACP, the parents take the case to the local court, and again it gets rejected on account of, or the thing that they use as a justification to reject her application is, remember Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Yeah, a Supreme Court ruling, Plessy versus Ferguson, that says that segregation is fine, segregation is perfectly legal, provided that the things that are being segregated are equal. Yes, are separate but equal. In the white school would need to be of the same quality as the black school, and vice versa. As we know from our own studies, this was rarely the case. It was rare that the facilities for black people, for African Americans, were the same as the white facilities. 9 times out of 10 the white facilities were better. But that's why it's rejected first of all. They then take it up to the Supreme Court, and let's get the right bit of paper. There you go. The Supreme Court eventually rule on the 17th of May 1954, so for your specific date, there you go, 17th of May 1954, that school segregation was unconstitutional. So from that point on, schools should not be and cannot be segregated. Okay, so that's the first significant event that you need to know about, and naturally that leads on to a few more events in the future, specifically Little Rock, that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But first of all, the next event that you need to know about in chronological order is the death of Emmett Till. That happens in 1955. It's on the 24th of August 1955 that Till allegedly flirted and touched, as Carolyn Bryant accused him of. It was on the 24th of August that happened. His body was found on the 31st of August 1955, having been, beaten to death and shot in the head by Carolyn Bryant's husband and his half-brother. Obviously, as I say, I'm not going into masses of detail. You should know about that already. Look in your book if you're confused by that. But death of Emmett Till was next in 1955. In 1955, going on into 1956, the next one is the Montgomery Bus Boycott. It starts in 1955 and goes on well into 1956. Okay, so key dates that you need to know about for this one. Rosa Parks is arrested on the 1st of December 1955. That is the day that she sits down in the seat on the bus. Bus fills up, white passenger gets on, tells her to move, or tells her to move. She refuses to, and she's arrested. That's on the 1st of December 1955. Then on the 5th of December 1955, quite a significant date in terms of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Well, number one, that's the day that the boycott officially begins. That people stop, or African Americans stop using the buses in Montgomery. And on the same day, that evening, the Montgomery Improvement Association, or MIA, as you guys should call it, or have called it, the Montgomery Improvement Association, is set up, and they obviously help keep the boycott going. They're the ones who help to organise carpools and things like that to keep the boycott going. They organise it. So it's 5th of December 1955. On the 20th of December 1956, remember it goes on for a whole year, or more than a year, the boycott. On the 20th of December 1956, the boycott ends. Okay, because by that point the Supreme Court have ruled that segregation on buses is unconstitutional. The next one that you may have forgotten about, partly because it wasn't a particularly effective, or arguably wasn't a particularly effective event, but it's still one that you need to know about, was the 1957 Civil Rights Act. Now, as we know, there's a much more effective Civil Rights Act coming in 1964. But remember, that was the second Civil Rights Act that we looked at. In 1957, the Civil Rights Act is passed or signed by President Eisenhower on the 9th of September 1957. Remember, this is a Civil Rights Act that looks specifically into voting. So it sets up a commission to look into why African Americans are being denied the vote, and it also rules that if it's found that African Americans are being deliberately denied the vote, federal courts can prosecute states that are doing this. But as we know, it wasn't particularly effective. Again, you should have some stuff written about that in your exercise book. There's already some stuff in the textbook, so look that up if you are confused about that one. Final significant event that we've looked at in the 1950s to do with the civil rights movement is Little Rock. Obviously links almost directly to Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. They're both to do with education. Little Rock, 1957. So, 4th of September 1957 is the day that the Little Rock 9, the 9 students, turn up for first day of school and are prevented from doing so. Remember that Governor Faubus of Arkansas has told the state troops to not let the Little Rock 9 in for fear that they'll cause trouble, or that it'll cause trouble. So it's the 4th of September that they're prevented from getting in, and this carries on, this continues every day up until the 12th of September 1957, when Eisenhower meets with Faubus to try and persuade him to let them in. Eventually, on the 23rd of September 1957, the police escort the Little Rock 9 into the school, but this ends up causing a riot outside the school, so the problem just escalates, and then Eisenhower, as we know, gets involved and sends down federal troops, so the country's troops, the country's army, the nation's army, to help the students get in. And it's on the 25th of September that they help the Little Rock 9 get in, 3 weeks after the start of term. But eventually they get into school, and the problem is sort of solved. Obviously we know that Faubus a year later ends up closing the school in protest. Again, there'll be more stuff written about that in your books and in the textbook, but they're the significant events that you need to know about. Okay, so in order: Brown versus Board, death of Emmett Till, Montgomery Bus Boycott, Civil Rights Act, and Little Rock. Okay, so 5 significant events that happened in the 1950s. So they're the kind of things that you could have and should have talked about in that mock exam. Okay, so as I say, if you want to go away and start doing your own timeline, you can do. Maybe just do a timeline for the 50s. There is one in your textbook already, but that looks at the entire period, so maybe to save a bit of confusion you might want to do your own for the 1950s. As I say, I'm going to do another video talking about the 1960s and the key events that happened in that period, in that decade, the 1960s. That will be uploaded either tomorrow or the day after, so have a look out for that one. But again, hope this has been useful to you. Hope you're enjoying your half term, and I'll see you soon.